Omega defies the Alpha King at Moonrise, yet a forbidden mark appears linking their fates forever. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main characters. In the kingdom of Valdoria, the moon was more than just a celestial body, it was a symbol of power, destiny, and the bond between mates. Tonight, the full moon hung high in the sky, casting an ethereal glow across the ancient stone grounds of the ceremony. It was the night of the lunar festival, a sacred event where every Omega was presented, and the Alpha King would choose his next mate. Among the gathered wolves, one Omega stood apart, Madison Vale, her heart heavy with dread. She had known this night would come, but nothing could prepare her for the shame that gnawed at her every moment. At 19, Madison had already been passed over countless times. Her ability to shift was weak, her wolf spirit barely a whisper within her. But tonight, she stood tall, determined not to let her weaknesses define her. The crowd murmured, eyes flicking from one Omega to the next, waiting for the Alpha King's decision. Madison felt their judgment as sharply as if it were a physical blow. Her pack, once proud and powerful, had fallen into ruin. She was no longer the daughter of the respected Vale family, she was just another discarded Omega, too weak for any Alpha to claim. As the ceremony began, Madison felt the weight of the pack's expectations pressing down on her. The pack's elite, the Alphas and Betas, eyed the other Omegas with interest, nodding and murmuring to one another. But Madison was invisible to them, no one stepped forward for her. No one dared. Alpha King Cyrus, the ruler of the Northern Territories, stood at the front of the gathering, his imposing figure silhouetted against the moonlight. His reputation was legendary, cold, ruthless, a king who ruled with an iron fist. Tonight, he would choose his next mate, and the entire pack awaited his decision. His gaze swept over the assembled Omegas, but when his eyes landed on Madison, something shifted. He made no motion to step forward, but his presence loomed like a storm gathering on the horizon. The whispers of the pack grew louder, as Madison's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't bear the humiliation any longer. She straightened her back, her chin held high. She would not be a passive participant in this charade. She would not be claimed by any Alpha who saw her as weak. With a quiet but firm voice, she spoke, addressing the Alpha King directly. "I will not be your mate." The words echoed across the stone courtyard, silencing the crowd. For a moment, everything stopped. Even Alpha King Cyrus seemed frozen, his piercing eyes locking onto hers. The pack gasped, shocked by her audacity. But Madison stood her ground, refusing to back down. The night air grew colder as the silence stretched on, broken only by the distant howling of wolves. The Alpha King's lips twitched slightly, a hint of something dark in his gaze. He said nothing for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. And then, as the moonlight bathed them both in silver, a strange, forbidden mark appeared on Madison's skin, a glowing sigil that pulsed with a power she could not comprehend. It was a mark that linked her fate to his forever, a bond forged by the moon itself. The crowd fell into stunned silence, but Cyrus's eyes softened for the briefest of moments, a flicker of something she couldn't place. Madison's heart raced. What had just happened? Why was this mark appearing now, in front of everyone? But before she could react, the Alpha King spoke, his voice low and commanding. "You are mine, whether you accept it or not." Madison stood in stunned silence as the glowing sigil on her skin continued to pulse, its light a soft, forbidden reminder of the strange bond that now tied her to the Alpha King. The crowd around them was completely still, watching in disbelief as the Omega, who had defied the Alpha King just moments ago, stood marked by the moon's mysterious power. Madison's heart pounded in her chest, her breath quick and shallow as she tried to process what had just happened. How could this be? She had no wolf spirit to call upon, no true power, yet. Here she was, marked by an ancient force that was beyond her understanding. The cold night air seemed to close in around her, but there was a warmth spreading from the mark on her arm, a warmth that felt both comforting and unsettling. For the first time in her life, Madison felt like she wasn't entirely alone. The Alpha King's gaze softened for a brief moment, but it was fleeting, replaced once again by the cold, calculating stare of the ruler. His voice broke the silence, deep and unwavering. You may resist, but the moon has chosen you. There is no escape from this bond. Madison's mind raced. How could this be happening? She had defied him, this wasn't how things were supposed to go. She was supposed to remain invisible, unnoticed, weak. Yet, here she was, the Alpha King's fated mate, bound by a mark that could never be erased. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain strong. The Alpha King took a step closer, his imposing figure casting a shadow over her. You will come with me, he said simply. Your fate is sealed. There is no turning back now. The power in his voice was undeniable, but there was something else beneath it, a threat of something Madison could not name. Was it concern? Regret? She couldn't be sure, but she wasn't ready to trust him, no matter what the mark on her skin said. She was still the same Madison, the Omega who had been cast aside, the Omega who had been humiliated. The Alpha King was not her savior. He was the one who had brought her here, forced her into this position. I don't want this, Madison whispered, more to herself than to him. The words hung in the air between them, but they were lost in the tension that crackled around them. For a moment, the Alpha King said nothing, simply observing her with those piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through her. Then, without warning, he reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against the glowing sigil on her arm. Madison flinched, but the touch was gentle, almost reverent. The mark has chosen, he said, his voice softer now, tinged with something that resembled sadness. It is not a choice. You are mine, just as I am yours. The moon has bound us together. The words felt like a heavy weight on Madison's chest, but there was no denying the truth in them. She could feel the pull, deep within her, as though something ancient and powerful was awakening inside her, something she had never understood before. The moon, the mark, the bond, it was all too much. She shook her head, stepping back slightly, her mind reeling. This isn't right, she said, her voice shaking with uncertainty. I never asked for this. No one ever does, the Alpha King replied quietly, his gaze never leaving hers. But fate does not ask. It simply chooses. The words hit Madison harder than she expected. Fate. The very thing she had always feared, the thing that had made her feel small and insignificant, was now the force that had tied her to the most powerful man in the kingdom. The realization was suffocating, and she felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. How could she, a mere Omega with no real strength, possibly stand beside the Alpha King, who was so powerful, so untouchable? Yet, as she stood there, staring into his eyes, she knew there was no escaping it. She could run. She could fight. But the mark would remain, glowing and binding her to him forever. And, despite the fear that twisted in her gut, she couldn't ignore the strange pull she felt toward him. The Alpha King, despite everything, was not her enemy. He was something else entirely, something that had been shaped by the same forces that had brought them together. I won't be your prisoner, Madison said, her voice steadier now, though her heart was still racing. I won't be controlled. The Alpha King's lips curled slightly, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You are not my prisoner, he said softly. You are my mate. And that is something no one can take from you. Madison took a deep breath, steeling herself against the rising tide of emotions. This was not the life she had imagined. But now that she was bound to him, she had no choice but to face what was coming next. The mark had sealed their fates, and there was no going back. The following morning, Madison awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside her window, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. She had barely slept, her mind racing with everything that had happened. The Alpha King's words echoed in her mind, you are mine, just as I am yours. The mark on her arm had not faded. It was still there, glowing faintly under her skin as if to remind her of the impossible bond that had been forged. Despite her resistance, despite her defiance, there was a part of her that couldn't deny the strange connection she now felt toward him. She sat up in bed, her heart heavy with confusion and fear. She had not asked for this. She had never wanted to be a part of this world of power and destiny. She had lived her whole life on the fringes, ignored and dismissed. But now, the moon itself had chosen her. As she glanced out the window, she saw the Alpha King's silhouette standing at the edge of the forest, his posture regal and commanding. He was waiting, as if expecting her to join him. The sight stirred something deep inside her, something she couldn't name. He was a king untouchable, powerful, and she, an omega with no real strength, had been linked to him by an ancient force she couldn't comprehend. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid of the bond or the Alpha King himself. She stood, her legs shaky as she crossed the room. There was no escaping the reality of her situation. She was bound to him now. She had no choice but to face him, to face whatever lay ahead. As Madison stepped outside, the cool morning air hit her face, a sharp contrast to the warmth that still lingered from her dream. The Alpha King's eyes turned to meet hers as she approached. There was no anger in his gaze, no cruelty, only a deep, unspoken understanding. "You're here," he said, his voice soft yet firm. "You don't have to say anything," he continued. "I know you're confused. I know this wasn't your choice." Madison's heart skipped a beat. How could he understand? How could he possibly know what she was feeling? "Then why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why choose me?" He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because the moon chose you. Because despite everything, you have a strength inside you that you don't even realize yet. You may not see it now, but you will. And when you do, you'll understand why we are connected." His words were both comforting and unsettling. Madison didn't want to admit it, but there was a part of her that believed him. There was a part of her that had always felt different, as if she were destined for something more than the quiet, forgotten life she had known. But this was too much. She couldn't just accept it. She couldn't simply bow to fate. She had to be more than just an omega, more than just someone who followed the rules set by others. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I don't want to be your prisoner," she said, lifting her chin, trying to find her voice. "I don't want to be a pawn in this game." The Alpha King's gaze softened, but there was no mistaking the intensity in his eyes. "You're not a prisoner," he replied, his voice gentle yet unwavering. "You are my mate. And that means you are my equal. We will face everything together, whether you're ready for it or not." Madison felt her chest tighten, a strange mixture of fear and something else, something like hope, swelling inside her. It was impossible to ignore the way his words made her feel, as if, for the first time, someone saw her. Not just the weak omega. Not just the girl who couldn't shift. But someone who was worthy of being seen. But could she trust him? Could she trust herself? The Alpha King took a step back, giving her space to breathe. "I know this is overwhelming," he said. "But you have a choice, Madison. You always have a choice." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He wasn't forcing her into anything. He wasn't claiming her as a possession. The choice was hers. But she knew that even though she had a choice, her fate was already sealed. The moon had chosen her. And now, it was time for her to choose him. Madison looked up at him, her heart still racing, but now with a sense of determination she hadn't felt before. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said, her voice steady. "But I'll try." The Alpha King nodded, his eyes glowing with something akin to approval. "That's all I ask." As they stood there, the bond between them seemed to grow stronger, the mark on her arm pulsing with an energy that connected their souls. Madison wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was on the edge of something far greater than herself. As Madison stood there, the weight of the Alpha King's words settled into her chest, mingling with the uncertainty that still gnawed at her. She had agreed to try, but the path ahead was not one she walked with ease. She felt his presence behind her, the power in his stillness, and for the first time, the reality of what being bound to him truly meant began to sink in. She was not just his mate in the eyes of the moon, but in the eyes of the world. The weight of this bond was heavy, and it was not something she could ignore. The Alpha King turned, and Madison followed, her steps hesitant at first, but something in her began to shift. With each step, the bond between them seemed to grow, the mark on her arm a constant reminder of what was now inevitable. As they walked through the forest, the sounds of the pack were distant, fading with each stride. The quiet serenity of the woods, untouched by the struggles of the pack, was strangely peaceful. Madison's thoughts, however, were far from peaceful. The Alpha King's presence was undeniable, and despite everything, she found herself drawn to him. The strange pull she had felt earlier was still there, stronger than ever, yet tangled with doubt and confusion. He had claimed her, and she had agreed. But could she really accept this new life? Could she truly step into the role that had been forced upon her? The moon had chosen her, but had she chosen him? The Alpha King led her to a small clearing, the light filtering through the trees, casting a soft glow on the ground. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and for a moment, Madison closed her eyes, trying to center herself. The sound of the Alpha King's voice broke the silence. "This is where you'll stay for now." He gestured to the small, secluded cabin that stood at the edge of the clearing. Madison glanced at the structure. It was humble, but the tranquility of the place seemed to offer something she hadn't felt in a long time: safety. She looked back at him, her eyes searching his. "You think I can just accept this?" she asked, her voice shaky. "This bond, this life you're offering?" The Alpha King paused, his gaze steady and unflinching. "You don't have to accept it all at once, Madison. I'm not asking for you to change overnight. But know this, the bond between us is real. It's not something you can fight." Madison felt the intensity in his words, and for a brief moment, the truth of his statement hit her like a wave. There was no turning back. This bond, this connection, was not something that could be erased. She could deny it, she could fight it, but in the end, it was a part of her now. And that frightened her more than anything else. "I'm not like the others," she whispered, her eyes dropping to the ground. "I'm not strong. I don't have what it takes to be your mate." The Alpha King stepped closer, his gaze softening just a little. "That's where you're wrong, Madison. You don't have to be like anyone else. You just have to be yourself. You have more strength than you realize." His words were calm, but they carried an undercurrent of something deeper. Something that made Madison want to believe him. She had always been told she was weak, that she was not enough. To hear him say the opposite felt foreign, like a truth she wasn't sure she could accept. But there was something in his eyes, something that told her he meant every word. "I don't know if I can believe that," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can believe in any of this." The Alpha King's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was no judgment in his expression, only understanding. "You will, in time. But for now, you'll stay here. You'll learn to trust yourself, and you'll learn to trust me." Madison took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with the weight of his words. She didn't know if she was ready for this. She didn't know if she ever would be. But the bond between them was undeniable. It had been sealed by the moon itself. She was tied to him now, whether she wanted to be or not. And though fear still gripped her heart, a part of her knew that she had to face this, whatever it was. She had no choice. The Alpha King turned toward the cabin, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he stepped inside. Madison stood still for a moment longer, the reality of what she had agreed to settling in her bones. This was her life now. The life of an Omega bound to the Alpha King. And as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, Madison felt a strange sense of resolve stir inside her. Whatever this was, whatever it would become, she would face it head-on. She had to. For the first time in her life, she was ready to find out who she really was. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty and strange new beginnings. Madison had never imagined that her life could change so drastically overnight, yet here she was, bound by a bond she barely understood. The Alpha King, Cyrus, had given her space, allowing her time to adjust, but there was no escaping the tension that hummed in the air between them. Every time she looked at him, she felt the weight of their connection, the mark on her arm reminding her that she was his, even if she wasn't ready to accept it. The cabin in the clearing was modest, but it had a warmth to it that Madison couldn't ignore. There was a hearth in the center of the room, the crackling fire providing both light and heat. It felt safe here, in a way, but that safety was tempered by the constant reminder of her new reality. She was a prisoner of fate, and fate had chosen her to be bound to the most powerful man in the kingdom. At least, that was what the Alpha King had said. As the days passed, Madison tried to settle into the new rhythm of her life. She learned the daily routines of the pack, the way things worked in the kingdom under Cyrus's rule. But nothing felt familiar. The wolves, the pack, the castle, it all felt distant, like a world she didn't belong to. But Cyrus had made it clear, she was a part of this world now, and no matter how hard she fought against it, she couldn't change that. One morning, after spending the day by the fire, trying to read one of the old books left in the cabin, Madison was drawn outside by the soft sound of the wind rustling through the trees. She needed a break from the heavy silence of the cabin. The outside air was cool, a stark contrast to the warmth inside. She walked slowly, the sound of her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of pine needles on the forest floor. The quiet was comforting, a small relief from the overwhelming pressure of her thoughts. As she wandered deeper into the forest, she couldn't help but think of Cyrus. He hadn't spoken much in the days since the ceremony, but his presence was always felt. He was a constant shadow, a looming figure just beyond the edges of her awareness. Despite the distance between them, Madison felt his eyes on her, always watching, always waiting. What did he want from her? Why had fate brought them together? Was this really a bond of love, or was it just a cruel twist of destiny? Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice low, steady, and unmistakably his. Madison. She turned quickly, her heart skipping a beat. He was standing a few feet away, watching her with those piercing eyes. His presence seemed to fill the space around them, and for a moment, Madison felt the pull of the bond more strongly than ever before. It was as if something inside her recognized him, something deep within her soul. I was just thinking, she said, her voice shaky as she tried to steady her breath. I know, he replied, taking a step closer. You've been thinking a lot lately. Madison frowned, unsure of how to respond. I don't understand any of this, she admitted, her voice small. This bond, this connection. How can I be tied to you when I barely know who I am? The Alpha King's expression softened slightly, and he moved closer to her. You don't have to understand everything right now, he said quietly. But know this, I'm not asking you to change. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. This bond is not something I forced on you, it's something the moon chose. And that means something, whether you're ready to accept it or not. Madison looked at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit. But there was nothing but sincerity. The confusion in her chest deepened, but for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the enemy she had thought him to be. I don't know what to do with all of this, she said softly. I'm scared. I don't know if I can live up to this. The Alpha King's gaze softened further, and he reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. You don't have to live up to anything, Madison, he said, his voice low and reassuring. You just have to be yourself. That's all I ask. And together, we will figure this out. Madison looked up at him, the uncertainty in her chest still there, but something else, too, a flicker of hope, a small spark of trust. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe she could trust him after all. The days drifted by slowly for Madison, each one blending into the next. The weight of the bond that tied her to the Alpha King, Cyrus, felt heavier with every passing moment, but strangely, it was not just the weight of obligation that pressed down on her. It was also the weight of expectation, the expectation that she, the Omega who had always been weak, would somehow rise to meet the challenges that lay ahead. The mornings were spent in quiet solitude. Madison would wander the woods near the cabin, trying to sort through her thoughts, the bond pulsing faintly in the back of her mind as if it were a living thing, reminding her of its existence. But the more she resisted, the more it seemed to grow stronger. And then, in the evenings, the Alpha King would return. He was always there, standing in the shadows, waiting. And each time he spoke to her, his words were calm, steady, never demanding, but always unyielding. There were moments when she felt herself drawn to him, as if the bond were not just a mark on her arm, but a tug on her very soul. And in those moments, she would catch a glimpse of him, of the man who was more than just a king. There was something softer beneath the hard exterior, something that Madison had only begun to understand. He was not the tyrant she had imagined him to be. He was, in many ways, a prisoner of his own fate, bound by forces beyond his control. One evening, after the sun had set and the sky had turned a deep shade of purple, the Alpha King found her once again, standing by the edge of the forest. Her hands were pressed against the rough bark of a tree, her head tilted back to the stars, her thoughts distant. She didn't hear him approach, but when he spoke, his voice was like a whisper against the cool night air. "Madison," he called gently, as though he feared disturbing her peace. She turned, her eyes locking with his, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to vanish. It was just the two of them, bound together by fate, by something neither of them could change. "Are you well?" he asked, his expression softening. She nodded slowly, but there was an unease in her gaze. "I'm still trying to understand all of this," she confessed. "Everything has changed so quickly. I don't know who I am anymore." The Alpha King stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You are Madison Vale," he said simply, his voice rich with sincerity. "That has not changed. You are still the same woman you've always been, and nothing will ever take that from you." Madison looked down at her hands, unsure of how to respond. She wanted to believe him, but the fear that had gripped her heart from the moment the bond had formed still lingered. How could she be the same person when her whole world had shifted beneath her feet? "But I'm not the same," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to be this person. How do I accept this bond when I still don't understand what it means?" The Alpha King's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "You don't have to understand everything right now," he said quietly. "The bond is a part of you, yes, but it does not define you. You are more than just the mark on your skin." His words were soothing, and Madison found herself leaning into the warmth of them, even though a part of her still resisted. She didn't want to be defined by something she hadn't chosen. But there was something in his presence that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could find her way. "You have more strength than you know," the Alpha King continued, his voice steady and unwavering. "And together, we can figure this out. I'm not asking you to change overnight. All I ask is that you trust me." Madison took a deep breath, the air around her filling her lungs with a sense of calm. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. Maybe this bond, this connection, was not a curse but a path she needed to walk. It wasn't a path she had chosen, but it was the path she was on now. And for the first time, she didn't feel completely alone in it. She met the Alpha King's eyes, and there, in the depths of his gaze, she saw something that made her believe. Maybe there was a way forward after all. "I'll try," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll try to trust you." The Alpha King nodded, his expression softening further. "That's all I ask." As he reached out to gently take her hand, the warmth of his touch sent a ripple of energy through her, and for a moment, Madison felt the bond between them shift, becoming something more than just a mark. It was a promise. And maybe, just maybe, it was a promise she could keep. Together, they would face whatever came next. The days grew longer as Madison adjusted to her new life under the Alpha King's protection. The cabin, once a place of solitude and uncertainty, began to feel more like home with each passing day. The Alpha King, Cyrus, remained a steady presence in her life, his words of reassurance echoing in her mind. He was patient with her, giving her space when needed, yet always close enough to offer guidance when she faltered. Madison found herself growing accustomed to his presence, though the bond that connected them was still a constant reminder of the change in her life. They spent their days in quiet companionship, with Cyrus occasionally offering her glimpses into his world, the world of the pack, the kingdom he ruled, and the responsibilities that weighed heavily on his shoulders. He never pushed her to accept the bond or the life he had set before her. Instead, he let her take her time, trusting that she would come to understand the significance of their connection in her own way. But despite his patience, Madison still struggled with the weight of it all. The bond between them was undeniable, yet the fear of losing herself, of becoming someone she was not, still gnawed at her. She had always Been the one who stood at the edges, never truly a part of anything, and now she was being asked to step into a life that was so far beyond what she had ever imagined. One evening, as they walked together through the woods, the quiet between them was broken by Madison's voice. "Cyrus, do you ever regret this?" she asked, her words barely above a whisper. He turned to her, his expression unreadable for a moment before he stepped closer. "Regret what?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Madison hesitated, unsure of how to voice the turmoil inside her. "Regret choosing me," she said softly. "I'm not like the others. I'm not strong. I don't know if I can be what you need." Cyrus looked at her for a long moment, the intensity of his gaze never faltering. "Madison," he began, his voice steady, "you are everything I need. I didn't choose you because you are like anyone else. I chose you because you are you. You are strong in ways you don't even realize yet. This bond, it was meant to be." Madison's heart fluttered at his words, but doubt still lingered in her chest. "But what if I can't live up to it?" she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "What if I'm not enough?" Cyrus reached out, his hand brushing gently against hers. "You are enough," he said simply. "More than enough." The warmth of his touch sent a spark of comfort through her, but the fear still lingered. "I don't know if I can do this," Madison admitted, her eyes downcast. "I don't know if I can be the Luna, the mate, the one who's supposed to stand beside you." Cyrus stepped even closer, his presence overwhelming in the most comforting way. "Madison," he said softly, "you don't have to be anyone other than yourself. You don't have to fit any mold. You just have to be true to who you are. That's all I ask. And as for being the Luna, I believe in you. And I'll be right here beside you, every step of the way." Madison met his eyes then, seeing the sincerity in his gaze, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she could do this. Maybe, with him beside her, she could find the strength to step into the life that had been chosen for her. The days ahead were still uncertain, and the bond between them was still something she was learning to accept. But in that moment, standing in the forest with the Alpha King at her side, Madison realized that she didn't have to face it alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Madison awoke the next morning with the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the trees outside the cabin. The forest around her was still, as if it were waiting for something. She could feel the weight of the day ahead pressing on her, the uncertainty of what was to come. She had agreed to try to trust in Cyrus, but the fear still lingered in her heart. Every step she took seemed to be guided by the bond that connected them, and yet, she couldn't help but wonder if she was ready for what that truly meant. She rose from the bed and made her way outside, the cool morning air refreshing against her skin. The Alpha King had given her space, but the quiet solitude of the cabin only seemed to amplify the doubts swirling in her mind. As she stood by the edge of the forest, her thoughts drifted back to the night before, to the promise Cyrus had made. He had said she didn't need to be anyone other than herself, but could she truly live up to that? Could she accept the role of Luna when she wasn't even sure who she was anymore? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. She turned to find Cyrus walking toward her, his expression unreadable but his eyes soft with something she couldn't quite place. "Madison," he said, his voice low and calm. "Are you well?" She hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm still trying to understand all of this. This bond, this life, I don't know if I'm strong enough for it." Cyrus stopped a few feet away, his gaze never leaving hers. "You don't have to be strong enough for everything, Madison," he said softly. "Strength comes in different forms. You have your own kind of strength, the kind that no one can take away." Madison shook her head, the doubt still clouding her thoughts. "I'm not like you," she said quietly. "I'm not a warrior. I'm not like the other Omegas who can stand beside you with confidence. I'm weak." Cyrus stepped closer, closing the space between them. "You are not weak," he said firmly. "You are brave in your own way. And that is what matters. You don't need to be like anyone else. You just need to be yourself." Madison felt a flicker of warmth at his words, but the uncertainty still lingered. "I'm not sure I can be who you need me to be," she whispered. "I don't even know if I'm ready for all of this." The Alpha King's expression softened, and he reached out to gently place a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to be ready right now," he said quietly. "We take this one step at a time, together. You have nothing to prove to me, Madison. Just trust in the bond between us, and we'll figure the rest out." Madison looked up at him, her heart racing. There was something in his eyes, something that made her believe in his words. For the first time, she allowed herself to let go of the fear, to let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be enough. "I'll try," she said softly. "I'll try to trust you, to trust in this bond." Cyrus smiled gently, his hand lingering on her shoulder. "That's all I ask." As they stood there, the air around them seemed to hum with an energy Madison couldn't quite explain. The bond between them, though still unfamiliar, felt less like a weight and more like something she could learn to navigate. For the first time since their fates had been sealed, she didn't feel completely alone in it. Together, they would face whatever came next. The forest was quiet, but Madison felt a sense of peace settling over her. The future was still uncertain, and the challenges ahead were unknown, but with Cyrus by her side, she felt ready to take the next step. Maybe the bond was something she could learn to embrace. Maybe, with time, she would understand its true meaning. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn to trust not only Cyrus but herself as well. The following week passed in a blur for Madison. With each new day, the bond between her and Cyrus became more real, more undeniable. It pulsed quietly beneath her skin, a constant reminder of the connection that had been forced upon her. But despite the uncertainty, Madison found herself growing more accustomed to the life she now led. She spent her days learning the ways of the pack, observing how Cyrus governed with calm authority, his decisions always final but never cruel. The Alpha King had proven to be more than just a ruler, he was a man of wisdom, someone who cared deeply for the welfare of his people. It wasn't what Madison had expected, but it was what she needed. He had kept his promise to give her space, never pushing her to accept the bond fully. But there were moments when she felt it, when he was close, when his gaze met hers, and she could feel the pull of the connection between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in a golden glow, Madison found herself standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the cabin. She had spent much of the day by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened since she had arrived in this strange new life. It was peaceful here, in the quiet of the woods, but the peace was always followed by a sense of uncertainty. She didn't belong here, not really. She was an Omega, someone who had never fit into the rigid world of alphas and power. And yet, she was here, bound to the Alpha King by forces beyond her control. She took a deep breath, her mind still racing when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Cyrus approaching, his expression unreadable but his eyes soft with something she couldn't quite define. "Madison," he said, his voice low, "I've been watching you these last few days. You've been quiet, and I sense the weight you carry." She didn't answer immediately, her gaze shifting away from him. It wasn't that she didn't want to talk to him, it was just that she didn't know how to put into words the turmoil that still gripped her heart. "I don't know what I'm doing here," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be the mate of a king. I don't know how to be what you need me to be." Cyrus stepped closer, his presence comforting, and yet, there was something in his gaze that made her feel vulnerable. "You don't have to be anything other than yourself, Madison," he said softly. "I never asked you to be someone else. The bond between us is real, yes, but it's not about being perfect. It's about being true to who you are." Madison's chest tightened at his words, and she felt a flicker of something stir inside her. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something close to it, an understanding, a connection that wasn't just born from the bond, but from something deeper. "But what if I'm not enough?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What if I can't live up to what's expected of me?" Cyrus reached out, his hand gently resting on her arm. The touch was warm, reassuring, and for a moment, Madison felt the fear in her heart ease. "You are more than enough, Madison. You always have been. Don't let the weight of expectations drown out the truth." She looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face, looking for any sign that he was saying these words out of obligation or duty. But all she saw was sincerity. The truth in his eyes made her believe him. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted, her voice shaky. "With you, with the bond. I don't know if I'm ready for it all." Cyrus's gaze softened, and he took another step closer. "You don't have to be ready all at once," he said quietly. "We take this one step at a time. Together." For the first time in what felt like forever, Madison allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something more than just surviving. There was still so much to learn, so much to accept, but maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to live this life with Cyrus by her side. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't as afraid of it. As Cyrus reached out and took her hand, Madison felt the bond between them shift, become something deeper, more tangible. It was no longer just a mark on her skin, but a promise, one that, for all its unknowns, she was finally willing to accept.